And you're listening to the prosecutor's opening statement in the Denise Williams case, maybe a little bit devoid of some of the drama that we're used to in many of the cases we've seen. Here to break it down with me, I have Mary Jo Snyder. She is an attorney out of Philadelphia. Mary Jo, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's Marni. Sorry.
Oh, Marni. I apologize. Marni Jo. And so from the city of brotherly love, where I am originally from as well. And so I guess the question I have for you, I've been listening and watching this case from the beginning, and I admit that I'm having a little trouble, and perhaps you can help me out, is how are they going to prove her guilt? Not just that they think she did it, or she might have known, or she might have been involved. How are they proving that she was involved beyond a reasonable doubt?
I think that's going to come down a lot to whether Brian Winchester can be believed when he's a cooperating witness. But they certainly are hoping to corroborate a lot of his statements with at least some physical evidence, like where the body's going to be found and things like that. And they're going to say, look, these text messages might not be clear, but when Brian Winchester takes the stand, the things that you hear are going to be the context from which you should view all of these messages and all of these things. And yeah, they're not an admission, I plan to kill him, but there's certainly an admission of involvement in some way, and Mr. Winchester is going to clear that up.
But see, I guess the problem for me is I'm not seeing it. So, we heard from Brian Winchester, and we'll hear some of his testimony a little later on today and this afternoon. And his testimony, obviously, I think there's no question, everyone agrees that Brian Winchester murdered his best friend. I think everyone accepts that. The problem is that the basis of how the prosecutor is attempting to prove that that Denise Williams is guilty is based really just on the testimony of Brian Winchester. And the corroboration really just corroborates that Brian Winchester is, in fact, the right guy who committed this murder, and not really pulling Denise in to kind of the planning and the execution of this case.
Right. I mean, prosecutors always have an uphill battle with cooperating witnesses that way, because do you want to take this person's story when they're either benefiting from something the prosecution is doing for them, or whether they've benefited some other way, or whether they have another motive to lie, like a grudge or something like that? So the prosecution doesn't just have to give some other evidence that Brian Winchester is telling the truth. They need to bolster his credibility with every single thing in their arsenal. And the jury obviously is going to decide, is that enough? And was it quality evidence that I care about? Does that do it for me that Brian Winchester is telling the truth?
And I think we're going to go and take a look at the defense opening statements, and then I want to come back to you, and I want to talk a little bit about that cooperation agreement and how relevant you think it will be for the jury's determination. Let's take a look now at the defense opening statements in the Denise Williams case. And that's an excerpt from the defense's opening statement in the Denise Williams murder trial. I'm here with Marni Jo Snyder. One of the things that came up during, that we've been talking about a lot, is this cooperation agreement. And I've tried many homicide cases. Rarely do you have the cooperator be the actual shooter. It's usually the other way around. And so this is kind of unique, because you have the person who actually put the bullets into Michael Williams' body being the one who sits on the stand and testifies against the person who wasn't even there when the crime happened. Tell me what you think the jury's going to think about something like that.
Well, I think that's going to be, you just summed up an excellent argument by the defense, which is going to be, it has to be this motive for revenge or getting out of trouble with an immunity agreement, because why else would the prosecution, he came to the prosecution with this evidence, right? If they had their way, maybe they would have had the less hands-on party in the conspiracy be the one that cooperates against the murderer. So they're going to point out that whole dynamic between the witness and the prosecution as they make their argument. And in his closing, he already pointed out two motives that didn't even talk exactly about that dynamic, which was revenge and to get back at her, and to get full immunity for a murder. They didn't offer, he's doing 20 years, right? So they didn't offer him 30 years at the same time and you do an extra 10. They said, no problem with this murder, we're not going to charge you with it. And that's an incredible immunity agreement to speak about.
It's a, in the words of my mother, it's a cockamamie cooperation agreement. We're going to go to break. We're going to talk some more about it. Stay tuned. testimony of Cheryl Williams, Mike Williams' mother. She obviously is the victim's mother and had done quite a lot over the 17 years to try to get investigators to pursue this as a murder case. She believed her son had been killed, and she was right all along. I'm going to bring back Marni Jo Snyder. Marni Jo, I mean, look, this is the mother of Michael Williams. You can't get any more riveting or devastating to imagine the loss of a child. But does the testimony that she's giving this jury make out, not that Brian Winchester committed a murder, but that Denise Williams committed a murder?
Right. Well, I mean, it's part of the puzzle. It's certainly context, and like you said, it's very compelling, so I can understand why the prosecution wants this. But even though she didn't make an admission in that house, that conversation is very interesting. I mean, in theory, her husband was taken from her by someone if she wasn't part of the murder, and she doesn't want it to be looked into anymore, so much so that she would hold her child away from their grandparent. And so it's compelling in that way, and there might be another motive there.
And I think, look, I mean, we always look at things from several sides, and, there's an argument, I think, to be made, from the defense point of view is that, first of all, it's not unusual for in-laws not to get along with each other, even when people are alive. And so that's first. And so we always hear things like that. Second, the fact that, in a sense, Denise Williams wants her to stop investigating, it may just be as simple as Denise Williams believes her husband died of natural causes and was killed unrelated to a murder, and she wants to move on with her life. I hear you, though. I mean, obviously, we talk, and this is the puzzle that we're talking about, but one wonders again, and I hate to reiterate this, whether or not if you take that puzzle with the testimony, if you take Cheryl with the testimony of Brian Winchester, whether you don't come back to the thing we keep saying, which is, well, Brian Winchester killed him, we know that, but did Denise Williams kill him? And I guess one of the other questions I have for you is, does this prove that Denise Williams committed a crime or was involved in the murder, or simply that Denise Williams may have known something happened?
Right. I mean, I think that the arguments that you made are dead on, and that's what we're hoping that we see from the defense tomorrow to keep it interesting, to keep, that's the exact argument that I'd love to see them make. And I think that you just don't want to pass up this witness talking about this strange conversation. And I do agree, there are plenty of people who are related to someone who they've lost that want closure, and that's why they don't want the investigation to be ongoing. But I guess what is interesting is she walks in with Brian Winchester. So is Brian Winchester taking advantage of her in order to stop the investigation by being part of this conversation? Or is she wanting the investigation to stop to protect her new love, Brian Winchester? So these are all things for the jury to decide. I wonder what other pieces of evidence the prosecution might point to kind of take away what we were just saying about that.
That's actually an excellent point, and actually let's look at Nick Williams. Nick Williams is the son of Cheryl Williams and the brother of Mike Williams, and he testified as well. Let's take a look at what he had to say. And that was the testimony of Nick Williams. He is the son of Cheryl Williams and the brother of the deceased Mike Williams. We're going to take a little break, and we're going to hear from my dearest, dearest friend, Aaron Keller. He's going to give you a little rundown on the Daily Debrief.
Julie, good afternoon. Tonight on the Debrief, coming up at 5 o'clock Eastern here on the Law&Crime Network, we're going to weave through some of these critical pieces of testimony from the final witnesses in the Denise Williams case to try to see if the prosecution upheld its burden in proving beyond a reasonable doubt that Denise Williams, not Brian Winchester, is truly the one to blame for this death. We're also going to talk briefly about accused Russian spy Maria Butina and her guilty plea in federal court to charges that she was an unregistered agent of the Russian government while in the United States, plus a plea agreement from a suspected serial killer who's bragging about killing 90 people over a period of 4 decades. That's tonight on the Daily Debrief, coming up tonight at 5. Julie, back to you.
Thank you, Aaron. And we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back. And that's Kathy Thomas testifying, or actually what we're listening to is a wire of her having a conversation with Denise Williams. It's a little hard to follow, and quite frankly, I'm not sure what exactly we're supposed to be getting from it. I'm going to bring in one of our friends of the show, and Michael Bryant. Thank you for being here.
Happy to be here, Julie. How are you?
I'm good.
Confused, like everybody?
I'm a little confused, and so tell me what you make of this wire, and tell me how this pushes the ball for the prosecution over the edge and makes her guilty of murder.
First of all, I'll tell you, to prepare for following this case, I spent 5 hours watching As the World Turns. That helped me kind of understand the strange back and forth relationships.
I don't know if it's on TV anymore, but if it's not, you definitely have all the names you need.
So, on that particular recording, even though it is tough to tell who's talking about whom with what, the thing I really noticed is the demeanor of each of the people on that tape. Kathy Thomas is a wreck. You know, she was married to the guy who's now in prison for killing the husband of the woman she's talking to. And the woman she's talking to, Denise, calm as a cucumber. You know, here's why I think the police want to talk to you. They wanted to say this. They want you to find out that. And Kathy Thomas is just a bowl of Jell-O.
Right.
So if the jury gets nothing else from that tape, it will help them understand maybe the respective mindsets of the players, okay? That's a very visceral kind of bit of evidence, but to me that could be just as important as what are they saying, what do they mean?
You know, it's such a great point. I'm going to pull Marni Snyder in about this topic, because we talk all the time when we talk about murder cases about demeanor, and we have, you know, there's comments made all the time about people going, well, he didn't cry, or he didn't cry enough, or he looked like he was crying but he didn't have tears. So, you know, Marni Jo, let me ask you this question. You know, I think jurors get impacted by the demeanor of defendants, even as they sit there. If they chuckle, they don't like it. You know, but I wonder, you know, does that really mean anything at the end of the day?
I think that it matters a lot when the person that you're listening to on a wire or a tape has a demeanor that is oddly different from that's shown in the courtroom. I think that really bothers juries, that, you know, where were you putting on the show? You didn't know you were being taped before. Why are you putting on this show for us? There's all different things that they can kind of get from that. But, you know, the problem with being really emotional, too, is that, you know, you're not always thinking about what you're saying before you're saying it. You can mean something different. We speak based on our emotions, sometimes not on fact. People blame themselves, too, for things that didn't really happen. So to play devil's advocate, you know, she might have been really upset because she doesn't know how to handle all the different emotions that have been going on for all these years. So we'll see what they bought and what they didn't.
And an excellent point. You know, when we talk about drama and we talk about performance, you know, we're going to now go to Brian Winchester, because Brian Winchester, I think we can all agree, had quite a melodramatic performance when he testified at trial. Let's take a look. And that's Brian Winchester testifying on behalf of the prosecution. I think, you know, one of the things I noted, and we'll talk about eventually, is he had quite a different demeanor when he testified on cross than when he did on direct. Let me go to you, Michael, first, because we were talking a little bit about, you know, the character that Brian Winchester is. And one of the things we're talking about is he doesn't come off as the brightest, you know, guy.
No, he's very self-effacing. He admits that, you know, Denise is smarter than me, and, you know, yeah, I'm just a regular guy here who shot my friend in the face.
Who shot my friend in the face. And I guess what I wonder is, you know, sometimes, you know, and I know Marni Jo was talking about this, you know, when someone's talking, you know, in a courtroom, or their demeanor is, you know, people are noticing how they're, in a sense, performing. And one wonders, you know, is he being forthright when he says she's the smart one, or is he again manipulating the jury into believing that he just kind of went along for the ride and it was all her? Because there's no evidence really that indicates it was all her.
I know. And this gets back to that phone conversation. Remember how I thought she seemed very kind of in control and manipulative even then of Kathy when she was on the phone? It wouldn't be tough for the jury to envision her having that same kind of manipulative approach to this poor guy who seems, and when he does break down a couple of times on the stand, if he's an actor, he should get an Oscar, because that looks as real as it gets to me. So the jury starts to put those pieces together, and it doesn't seem to me inconsistent with her phone conversation to suggest maybe he was being just kind of bullied by her.
And Marni Jo, again, when we talk about kind of the manipulation, obviously, the evidence is what the evidence is, and he's testifying. I do question when Michael Bryant says he's a good actor. I think he's a little over the top. I think it's a little too late to be crying over the death of your best friend when you've already shot him 17 years ago and are in a sense coming to Jesus now. So I question that. But one wonders, at the end of the day, is he being sincere, or is he trying to, as he's been doing for the past year and a half or 2 years, trying to throw the woman who had him arrested for kidnapping him under the bus?
The big thing, right, is he's not an innocent, naive little guy that was pulled around by her. He's capable of certain crimes, and they're going to point out that he is capable of kidnapping someone. And pled no contest to it and is serving quite a long sentence. So I think this is a huge point at where his conviction for that kidnapping comes into play, other than just why immunity agreements might have been negotiated. He's capable of this. He's capable of violence. Why would he be capable of lying and manipulation?
Absolutely. He's capable of the ultimate, which is the murder of your best friend. On that, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. And sorry about that clip. The clip we were talking about is a clip of Brian Winchester, and where Brian Winchester basically says he had a conversation with Mike Williams. Mike Williams said that there were a lot of problems in the marriage and some discussions that indicated the marriage was not as the defense had described. Michael Bryant, just quick to you. Does the defense need to prove that they had a good marriage in order to get her out of this murder charge?
I mean, it's almost counterintuitive. There were problems everywhere, okay?
Right.
Let's just forget about that and focus on the murder and what she did or didn't do connected to the murder.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think, the defense wants to sell a little too much to this jury. And I think that by doing that, at the end of the day, if the jury thinks that she was having an affair, or if the jury thinks she wasn't happy in her marriage, they're going to now believe that the defense didn't fulfill their obligation, even though they don't have one.
Of course.
And think she's guilty of murder.
And the jury's going to have to disbelieve most of what Brian Winchester says about we got together in '97, we had an 8-year affair, and then we got married, and all of that overlapped the murder of her husband. I feel like the defense has such a great defense, and in a sense, they're asking for too much. Yeah.
They want her to look
a saint.
Pure.
She's a saint.
Right? She doesn't have to be a saint. She could be having an affair for years and still not have committed the murder.
Exactly.
We're going to come back in a few minutes and talk some more about this amazingly interesting case of Denise Williams out of Florida. Thank you so much. And thank you, Rachel Stockman. I want to talk a little bit about what we just heard. And one of the things I know we wanted to talk about is this cooperation agreement that Brian Winchester received. I want to bring Marni Jo Snyder in, and then we'll talk a little bit more to Michael Bryant. Marni Jo Snyder, explain this to me, if you can. Why on earth? We've done a million cooperation agreements when I was a prosecutor and as a defense attorney. Why on earth are you giving a cooperation agreement where he basically walks away clean, clear, no matter what, whether he lies or tells the truth? What on earth was the prosecutor thinking in this case?
Right. I mean, I have to be honest, I don't know. I've never seen something that was quite such a gift where they then expect him to be the star witness against the defendant. They know that this is, one, going to be ammunition for the defense attorney, and second, they're letting him get away with shooting his best friend in the face. I really think it's very strange. I think it's strange that they didn't offer, he's already serving 20 years. I think that there also would have been something that could have been attractive to him as far as taking responsibility and an offer on the table.
It's funny. I agree with you, and let me turn to you, Michael. Look, I think one of the things that we all know is that Cheryl Williams wanted to know where her son was, and so in a sense, the cooperation agreement is worth that in certain ways to her, sure, because we now know that he was murdered. We know, and we have his body. But I agree with Marni Jo that one thinks that the prosecution could have sold him on some time.
Something.
And by the way, it would be sellable to the jury, much more sellable than this ridiculous cooperation agreement where he could say anything he wants and the jury either buys it or they don't.
Now, remember, a couple of things going on here. My first guess is that they felt they had so little on Denise that maybe this was the only way to get her. To
Right.
get his full cooperation. Now, it's a use immunity. They don't really have transactional immunities anymore, but the way the immunity agreement is written, it's pretty broad, but still, if they could find independent evidence to point to Mr. Winchester, they can use that against him. This is a use immunity.
I believe, and by the way, you might be right, but I believe the judge gave an instruction that indicated they couldn't even do that either.
With independent,
correct.
Because the agreement very clearly lays it out. If there's independent information.
But by the way, I tend to be wrong, so I might be wrong.
But the judge could be wrong.
Right, but I remember the judge making that statement. And by the way, let's assume for a second that's true. You still, you're basically selling someone to the jury that, in a sense, has no risk.
As a get out of jail free card. Really? Yes.
All.
Yeah, you're right. I really think they had nothing else to work with against her, and they didn't want to let her go.
Yeah, Marni, Joe, you think the same?
Yeah, I mean, but I also think that even if they had the independent clause in the immunity agreement, which is that if based on, what they start investigating, they can find something else against him, of course they can use that, just not his own words. I mean, they haven't found anything that fascinating against her, so why they would rely on the independence clause is beyond me. They could have offered a plea that was low. They could, like I said before, they could have offered him 30 and he's already serving 20. They could have offered him 25 and he's already serving 20, and made it concurrent. I just not sure that I understand why full immunity was on the table.
I think you're right, and they didn't get any more evidence in 17 years. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. And that's the opening statement from Denise Williams, defense attorney, talking about Brian Winchester, the murderer, the person who actually pulled the trigger and killed Michael Williams, and talking about his testimony in this case. And I want to turn to my legal analyst, Michael Bryan. I want to ask you this question. We talked a little bit in opening, the defense did, about the fact that and I'm going to call him the defendant because I get so confused, Brian Winchester.
Here's my chart. You want to borrow my chart? Yeah.
Brian Winchester was so obsessed with Denise Williams that after all is said and done, he takes a loaded semi-automatic weapon, goes and attempts to kidnap her. And here's my question, is after all is said and done, she reports it to the police. And my question is, if she's worried that she's going to be implicated in a murder, if her love interest husband is going to be arrested for kidnapping her, why doesn't she keep it quiet? Why doesn't she say, you know what, he's acting up, I'm just going to keep it quiet because I don't want the police involved in anything? Isn't she going to be worried that she gets him arrested, he's going to say, she's getting me arrested, she killed her husband?
You would think that he's going to immediately retaliate against her for nailing him for the, quote, kidnapping, which was the most bizarre kidnapping I've seen. I mean, I don't excuse any activity like that, but it was a pretty weird little moment.
Right.
Nonetheless, cost him 20 years ultimately. But you're right. So why doesn't she just lay low and see what the next chapter is in this bizarre story? I think she's pretty calculating. I still believe that. And that it makes it look like, she's totally innocent of all of this stuff. Why would I hide the fact this guy's trying to kidnap me?
You know what? By the way, that's a great point. Marni Snyder, I want to bring you in on this. Michael's right when he says, she can be viewed as manipulative and going like, oh my God, I'm the damsel who is, being basically, accosted and attacked by the defendant who committed a murder. But at the end of the day, she's not the one who got Brian Winchester to take a loaded weapon and try to kidnap her. He made that decision all by himself, and he's the person that the jury at the end of the day has to believe did this crime kind of at the behest of her.
Right, and I think you've said it with more passion right now than I think the defense attorney did in that opening argument, and I think he tried to add some sarcasm into it. But really, this is a person that's admitting to shooting someone in the face, that kidnapped someone with a bunch of bleach in the back of the trunk, He's obviously somewhat obsessive because even they had been broken up for a period of time. And I would just paint him as someone who has it out for her. He could barely handle himself to live without her before, murdered her husband, took her for himself, and then when he couldn't have her, almost tried to kill her. And that's how I would have painted him, and much more forcefully.
I agree with you. And, one of the things I think that we all forget is that it's not that we forget, but we forget to talk about it, is it's the people's burden to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. So at the end of the day, as a defense attorney, you can say to the jury, listen, you may think that she was involved. You may wonder and have an inkling she's involved. But what evidence in the world proves it beyond a reasonable doubt? And that's the problem, I think, in a sense, I hate to say I hope, but, you want justice to prevail, and you want it to be based on the evidence or lack of evidence. And so I wonder, at the end of the day, if they can just simply say that.
Even though the jury doesn't have to find motive, if you believe the defense and that she had nothing to do with the planning or carrying out of the murder of her husband, Mike, the jury's still going to want to know, well, why did Brian do it then? Was it because he, in and of himself, he was so obsessed with Denise that was the only way he could have her to himself? I think they have to believe that if they think she's not involved at all.
But I think they can believe it because of his kidnapping afterwards. Because he has shown himself to be willing to go to that nth degree.
After he's already got her, though? He's already got her.
Well, but no, he doesn't have. But by the way, in a sense, he's lost her again. And so now he's taking that effort, which, by the way, just to me indicates this is a guy who's basically willing to do anything to hold on to the person that he loves.
Okay, not a bad argument. Not a bad argument. And the jury, they're going to have a choice. One is based on believing Brian Winchester, and one is based on believing he's just out there to do whatever Brian needs to do to help Brian.
Sure. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. And there's a lot of buzzing going on here as we listen to the cross-examination of Brian Winchester. And one of the things I think I noticed, Michael Bryan, is how different he answers the questions when posed by the prosecutor and when he posed by the defense attorney. I always catch it when a person who is being asked questions on cross-examination can't just answer the question. They have to fill in with their own little lines to make sure that the jury is hearing their version of what they want the answer to be to that question.
And, defense counsel is giving him a little more leeway than I think I would. I would make them much more pointed and much more yes/no. Don't let him narrate whatever the answer is.
I agree, and actually sometimes the judge will step in and say, "Listen, sir, answer the question," but then sometimes the judge will go, "Oh, let him answer whatever question."
And then you're worried, what's the jury going to think? Maybe I'll just take a step back here. But yeah, he's definitely trying to help himself.
Sure, and Marni Snyder, one of the things you commented on is they asked him the question that every single defendant knows and every single witness knows when they're testifying, which is, what's your date that you're going to be getting out and be free?
Right. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, I had to sneeze. I don't buy that. He doesn't know the date that he's getting out. And Brian Winchester did a nice job of explaining that in the federal system, you don't get to say to the prosecution, okay, this is the number of years we're going to get. The judge decides based on the guidelines. But he did get a big break when kidnapping can carry a life sentence for people, and he has a bunch of bleach in the back. So I think he almost needed to not minimize that and say, look, I'm paying for what I did on the kidnapping charge. I got a lower sentence than I was looking at, and therefore I had no reason to lie against her because I didn't need that ammunition.
Right, and it's funny, whenever we have a defense witness testifying, as a prosecution witness testifying for us when we are the prosecutor, everyone knows that we talk to our witness beforehand. There's nothing wrong with talking to the witness. You can't tell them what to say, but you certainly go through with them. And one of the things you always tell your witness is, please don't be combative. Please just answer the questions that are asked of you, because the minute you don't, you look evasive, and the jury is going to start to not buy what you're saying.
Right.
However, I will say one of the things about this cross-examination that stands out is something you said, Michael, which is the whole idea that there is a viewpoint of this that you might start to go, well, maybe Denise Williams really is the most manipulative black widow out there, and she got him right where she wanted him. The idea that he committed that kidnapping kind of fell into her lap and laid out beautifully.
Exactly. That's That's one interpretation. What I do think is interesting, too, about his testimony is he's trying to create this woe is me kind of thing. I don't know when I'm getting out, if I survive.
I
boo-hoo for the guy who blew the head off his best friend. I just don't think that plays very well.
I agree, and I think what also doesn't play well is the fact is he's spending all this time in jail, and none of it has anything to do with Michael Williams.
Right.
It only has to do, by the way, with the person that's on trial for murder. So he's being held responsible for what he did to her,
yes,
but he's not being held responsible for what he did in the death of his best friend. One of the things I think we want to move on from is we want to talk now and switch gears a little bit and go back a little bit with regards to Brian Winchester, because when this murder happened almost 17, now it's 18 years ago, the police were doing an initial investigation, and there were items that were found at the scene that it came to believe that Brian Winchester, who eventually admits to it, planted in order to get the authorities to think that Michael Williams died naturally. Let's take a look. And so what do we get from Brian Winchester's testimony there? Well, we heard from the investigator that they had recovered a hat along with many other items eventually from the crime scene where the boat was. And we hear from Brian Winchester that in order to throw off authorities, he threw in a hat that looked like one of the hats that Michael Williams used in order to convince authorities that Michael Williams had died of natural causes of drowning. I'm here with Michael Bryant. And Michael, we were talking off camera, and you brought up an excellent point that I want to talk about that I missed or forgot about, I'm ashamed to say, and I'm proud of you, is that Brian Winchester, when he testified, talked about attempting to do this once before.
Right. I mean, this thing was 10 months in the planning, and it was pretty well laid out. And whether you believe it was with the help of Denise Williams or just Mr. Winchester, it had been in the works. And he began, that early morning hunting trip,
right,
and it got called off at the last minute by the ultimate victim. Mike Williams called it off. Why? Well, because his wife said, don't go hunting.
Right.
So if she was involved at any point in any conspiracy, did she end her involvement at that time? And then whatever was done after that was without her contribution?
It's an excellent point, and actually in certain ways lends credibility to Winchester, because, why bring up a first time that he attempted to do it unless it's true? So it kind of adds
it can cut both ways, there's no doubt about it.
It's an interesting spin.
But it does make it sound like she had some hesitancy at some point, if you believe she was involved, and yet he was able to convince her to move forward, or he just did it on his own.
Right, and Marni, Joe Snyder, let me bring you in again. It's an interesting point that he's testifying that they had both attempted to do this again, and she backed off. In a sense, it does cut both ways, but one wonders if the fact that he did it again on that second time makes you believe was he the mastermind, or was she the mastermind in that second go at it?
Yeah, I can't tell, and it is interesting that they brought up, right, does it lend credibility or not, and they brought this up. The one thing that I noticed about this particular part of the testimony, though, is that he barely talks about her. And you were talking before that I thought was so on point about preparing your witness for the way that you're going to ask questions, encouraging the truth, but kind of set them up for how you would like the narrative of the truth to come out. And I noticed that he doesn't ever go back to, this is what she was thinking at the time. This is what she was telling me. We wanted that body found. And so when we're saying that each thing can cut both ways, he's not tying it together in the way that it's going to cut towards the guilty, the way that I think a better prepared witness would.
I think you're right. I think he spends a lot of time doing a lot of I's and tries to fit in those we's at the wrong time, which fits in perfectly to us going back to cross-examination and taking a look at some additional testimony of cross-examination of Brian Winchester. And a line you can expect to hear in the defense closing arguments, a line on cross-examination through Brian Winchester. He was willing to do anything to avoid going to prison. And that's a statement that was made during cross-examination of Brian Winchester. Michael Bryant, that's the last thing you as a prosecutor ever wants your main witness to admit
Everybody's
to.
thinking that,
Right.
But you don't want him to just roll it out there for you. You know?
And you know, it's funny because there's nothing about him that indicates or gets the jury thinking that, you know, he's doing this because he wants to right a wrong. It's like there's nothing about his testimony, and I think this goes into what Marni Jo was talking about. There's nothing about him that gets you to say, like, you know, he's saying, like, we did this. I am ashamed that we did this, but I need to tell you what we did, and she needs to be held responsible. It's just really kind of like, we did this, I got away with it, please include her in what I did.
Right, I tried this, I tried that, and by the way, she helped set the whole thing up, and he throws in enough of talking about her and him doing it together. He throws it in as almost at an aside at the end of a long narrative.
It's so, you know, I caught that too. Marni Jo, I think you were talking about that also. It's like, it's as though, you know, it's as though he's been rehearsed but not rehearsed enough. And it's almost, I'm not saying the prosecutor did this, but it almost is laughable in a way because it's almost like the prosecutor said to him, I'm not saying they did. Listen, every time you're asked a question, throw in at the end, and by the way, Denise Williams helped me out with this. That's how it feels when you hear the answers he's giving to these questions.
Right. I mean, on cross-examination, he might be, you know, telling himself, just answer the question as it was asked, right? But on direct, when he was asked, like, and then what did you do next? He didn't say, well, I was doing this, and to my knowledge, Denise was doing this, or, and then Denise called me and we said. He really kind of described him doing a murder, and you're right, threw it in at the end, oh, she wanted me to. And it's very odd testimony, and I'm not sure that it's the kind that's going to be able to be explained away at closing with, like, well, he was emotional when he said it, or, you know, he's coming from prison, or it happened a long time ago. So I'm kind of wondering what they're going to do with his poor performance as the prosecution. And
that may be partially to blame of the prosecution and partially his own blame for having his own agenda as to what he wants to see happen. We're going to go to break, and we'll be right back. And that is the testimony of Brian Winchester, basically saying that he is not the person that was going to benefit from the life insurance policy. Very quickly, Michael Bryant, he wasn't going to benefit, but if he marries her, he sure as heck is going to benefit.
But to me, this is the most damning evidence against Denise Williams, because it's cliche. You know, we're going to get some more insurance just before we whack you. I think it's very hard to say I had nothing to do with it when the series of events suggests the insurance was put in place timely, with her in mind, her plan to kill.
And I hear you, except at the end of the day, and I'm going to cut to Marni Jo really quickly, at the end of the day, the evidence didn't support that she was the one who got him to do it. And so if she's not the one, then this is just another red herring.
You're right. They're thin on that evidence. You're right. But that's the theory. You're right.
And so, Marni Jo Snyder, you know, I want to cut you for a second, just get your take before we head on out of here.
Yeah, I mean, people kill people for money, drugs, sex, love, those kinds of things, and they're certainly trying to throw that money motive in here, and we'll just see if they can connect any other dots so that motive becomes compelling.
And I want to thank you both for being here. It was absolutely a pleasure. You're going to be hearing from Aaron Keller for the Daily Debrief. Please stay tuned to hear from him, and then honestly be here tomorrow. We're going to hear from the closing arguments on Denise Williams.